At the turn of the 20th century, the Russian Empire stretched across a sixth of the Earth's landmass, but its wealth was increasingly generated in environments like this: dark, suffocating factories where a new class of peasant-turned-industrial workers labored for poverty wages. In December 1904, management at the Putilov Iron Works in St. Petersburg dismissed 6 employees. The managers claimed it was a standard personnel decision, but for a workforce already stretched to the point of starvation by long hours and rising prices, this minor labor dispute became a breaking point. Within weeks, sympathy strikes paralyzed the city. By late January, 150,000 workers from nearly 400 factories had walked off the job. The power grid went down. The newspapers stopped printing. Looking for a way forward, the striking workers turned to Father Georgy Gapon, a charismatic Orthodox priest. Gapon did not advocate for an uprising. Instead, he organized a peaceful religious procession. He drafted a petition addressed directly to Tsar Nicholas II. Written in deeply reverent language, it begged the monarch for an 8-hour workday, fair wages, and basic suffrage. The workers firmly believed the Tsar, their little father, was simply unaware of their suffering and would intervene on behalf once he read their pleas. These laborers were not attempting to dismantle the Russian autocracy. They were participating in a centuries-old practice of bringing grievances directly to the sovereign, asking only to be treated as human beings. On the freezing Sunday morning of January 22nd, tens of thousands of workers and their families marched toward the Winter Palace. They carried religious icons and portraits of the Tsar, singing hymns as they walked through the snow. The Tsar was not at the palace. Instead, the crowd was met by regiments of the Imperial Guard. When the marchers refused to disperse, the soldiers leveled their rifles and opened fire into the densely packed square. Hundreds of unarmed men, women, and children were killed. As the dead lay in the snow, the deeply ingrained belief in a benevolent monarch evaporated. The centuries-old trust between the people and their Tsar died with the protesters. In the chaotic months that followed, the working class had to coordinate massive strikes and distribute weapons without a central authority. To manage this, they spontaneously formed decentralized elected councils. They called them Soviets. The government eventually regained control. By late 1905, the Tsar deployed brute military force to crush the lingering resistance, executing thousands and sending the most prominent organizers into exile. The 1905 uprising failed to topple the monarchy. But the survival tactics forced upon the workers, specifically the creation of the Soviet councils, provided a functional blueprint for a parallel government. 12 years later, the Russian Empire was bleeding to death in the trenches of the First World War. By 1917, the domestic economy had collapsed, and the daily misery of the civilian population far exceeded the conditions of 1905. Once again, the Putilov factory workers initiated a massive strike. On International Women's Day, they poured into the streets of Petrograd, joining thousands of women who were already protesting severe bread shortages. From his military headquarters, Tsar Nicholas II relied on the exact same playbook he used on Bloody Sunday. He ordered the city's garrison to suppress the unrest with live ammunition. But the troops garrisoned in Petrograd were traumatized conscripts, dreading deployment to a disastrous front. Instead of firing on the starving crowds, entire regiments mutinied, handed over their weapons, and joined the protesters. The Romanov dynasty collapsed in a matter of days. The protesters were no stronger than they had been 12 years prior, but the state's monopoly on violence had fractured, forcing the Tsar's abdication. The fall of the monarchy left a massive political vacuum in Petrograd. Out of this void emerged two rival authorities, an arrangement known as dual power. On one side stood the official provisional government, made up of former politicians and liberal elites. On the other side was the grassroots Petrograd Soviet, resurrected from the ashes of 1905 by the workers and soldiers. The Soviet quickly asserted its dominance by issuing Order No. 1. This directive instructed soldiers to obey the provisional government only if its orders did not contradict the Soviet, effectively severing the official government from its own military apparatus. Despite holding only formal, paper authority, the provisional government made a fatal calculation. They chose to honor international treaties and continue fighting the highly unpopular war against Germany, ignoring the collapsing domestic situation. Public frustration boiled over in July 1917. Armed soldiers, sailors, and factory workers flooded the Nevsky Prospect, demanding that the Soviets seize total control of the country immediately. But the Bolshevik leadership recognized the rest of the country was not yet ready to support a socialist takeover. They refused to endorse the uprising. Left without tactical direction, the riot fractured. The provisional government ordered a brutal crackdown, driving Vladimir Lenin and other radical leaders into exile. The July days proved that raw anger and overwhelming numbers are useless without synchronized leadership. For a second time, a popular revolt collapsed into chaos. The provisional government's victory was temporary. Over the next 2 months, their continued military failures and inability to stop a right-wing military coup drove an exhausted public toward the radical left. By September, the political math had shifted. The Bolsheviks, who had consistently opposed the war and demanded land reform, secured a voting majority within the massive Petrograd Soviet. Watching the collapse of the government's credibility from his hideout in Finland, Lenin recognized a shrinking window of opportunity. He sent frantic messages to the Central Committee, demanding an immediate armed insurrection while the iron was hot. Inside the city, Leon Trotsky provided the tactical architecture for Lenin's vision. He established the Military Revolutionary Committee, designed to bypass debate and organize the Soviets' loyal soldiers into a highly disciplined strike force. By late October, the Bolsheviks had discarded the petitioning of 1905 and the spontaneous riots of the July days. They had weaponized the Democratic Soviet into a shadow army. On the night of October 24th and into the 25th, that shadow army moved. Rather than marching in massive, vulnerable crowds, small, coordinated units of armed workers and sailors systematically occupied Petrograd's vital infrastructure, seizing bridges, railway stations, and telegraph offices. By the following night, they surrounded the Winter Palace. Unlike the slaughter of Bloody Sunday, this final assault met almost no resistance. The remaining members of the provisional government were quietly arrested in their chairs. In a matter of hours, state power had officially changed hands, setting the stage for the creation of the world's first socialist state. The tactical precision of October grew out of a 12-year process of failure and adaptation. The tragedy of Bloody Sunday provided the initial evidence that petitioning was useless, forcing the Russian working class to learn the mechanics of dismantling an empire.